And joining us right now from CNN is Jake Tapper. Of course, he's the host of the Monday through Friday 4 p.m. show, The Lead with Jake Tapper, and also the host of State of the Union on the weekends. Jake, thanks for joining us.
It's my pleasure. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. And, of course, I watched with interest your coverage of the shooting in Oregon yesterday. First of all, why don't you give us an understanding of how it all went down from your perspective? You know, covering a live event like that and the flow of information, and it was quite a story to have to cover. And I don't know, as a journalist, isn't it difficult as a father to cover a story like that when, as a human being, the emotions start to affect you, I think?
It is. It's difficult covering these stories, but it is, of course, what we're paid to do. What's especially challenging about these types of shooting stories, campus shootings or theater shootings or wherever, is obviously a lot of the information that comes in initially from law enforcement, not just from witnesses, but from law enforcement, is not always accurate. In this instance, there were various numbers about how many people have been killed, and you might notice there was a long delay before the law enforcement officials officially released the name of the shooter. But, you know, sadly, we're getting used to this. We're getting used to these kinds of mass shootings happening, whether it's at the Navy Yard or Aurora or Sandy Hook. And, you know, it's difficult to cover it, obviously, from an emotional point of view as a dad, when you see young people in the line of fire for no other reason than they're just living their lives. And somebody with serious problems was able to get their hands on a very serious weapon. But again, you know, that is the job, and it's nothing compared to what the people in the town are going through.
Well, let me ask you this from a political standpoint. Even before the body count was confirmed and they were still putting up crime scene tape, President comes to the podium to talk about it. This has become sort of standard operating procedure. Before we know the facts, we're going to try to make political hay out of this. In fact, he said we should be political about this.
Well, look, I mean, I think I'm not going to defend or prosecute the president for making his remarks, but I will say this. We're seeing a lot of these incidents, mass shootings, just as a numerical matter, are increasing, and there are things that can be done. Now, whether you think that those things are further restrictions on guns or much more attention and funding and resources for mental health, or whatever, focus on the culture or some sort of, you know, Venn diagram when you go after everything here and try to figure out where the holes are and plug them. There are things that can be done. I mean, I heard from members of Congress yesterday who are opposed to further gun restrictions, but really, really want the nation to refocus on mental health and the need to revamp our mental health system. So it's not as though President Obama was the only one who was a lawmaker who was expressing anguish. He just was expressing his desires in a different direction than other people. But this is something that the culture, we can never stop it. But this is something that we as a public, we as a nation, can try to take more seriously and do something about. Again, I'm not calling for gun restrictions, whatever it is. I mean, you could be talking about a refocus on mental health, but there are things to be done.
Our guest is Jake Tapper, and of course, State of the Union is on Sundays at 9 a.m. and noon Eastern. And this Sunday, you've been having a lot of great presidential candidates. You had Ben Carson last week, made headlines with that interview. But this weekend, you're having a Democrat that I would venture to say a lot of Democrats would love if she were a candidate this time around, Elizabeth Warren. How has the senator from Massachusetts so quickly become such a power player in the party?
Well, I think there are a couple reasons. One of them is she really is a very gifted politician. And when you talk to her, when you interview her, you realize that she's one of these people who has this kind of aw shucks delivery about her, but is very credible, speaks from the heart, and what she says it soothes the hearts of frustrated progressives and liberals. I mean, they really hear in her and in what she voices and her frustration with Washington and Wall Street, something that they don't hear from other candidates necessarily. And then the other thing is she's talking about a lot of the issues, as she has been for a long time, that you don't and haven't heard from mainstream Democratic politicians in a while, Bernie Sanders notwithstanding, in terms of frustration with big money and Wall Street. So, I mean, she really is to the left. I think, you could probably compare her to just in I'm not comparing her substantively, but to Donald Trump or Ted Cruz or somebody that is definitely finding an audience for what he is saying on the right. Elizabeth Warren sold that role on the left, and Bernie Sanders as well, I guess.
All right, so quickly, the leadership battles, Kevin McCarthy, many people think he sort of stepped in it by making comments about the Benghazi Committee. Does that hurt his chances as Speaker?
I don't know if it hurts them. It doesn't help them. And I think that the odds are still very strongly in McCarthy's favor because there just isn't an alternative. There just hasn't emerged a challenger to him to run for Speaker who could wrest away control. It's not that he's not vulnerable or beatable, but it is that there just isn't a plan B. I'll tell you what his comments, I think the greater effect of his comments will be that you're now going to be hearing about them from now until November 2016, assuming Hillary Clinton gets the nomination, because that is now talking point number one. Whenever anybody talks about emails or Benghazi, Democrats are going to say, look, even House Speaker Kevin McCarthy admitted blah, blah, blah. And so that is a talking point. And, even though he has tried to walk the comments back and explain that the Benghazi Committee is not politically
the bell has
motivated.
rung. That's right.
Yeah.
I mean, the comments were pretty stark.
Yep. And David Brock from the Insidious Media Matters came out and said, hey, we've already got our television commercial produced, thanks to Kevin McCarthy's comment. Real fast, Jake Tepper, in the news today is a tragic story of 11 people killed in a U.S. C-130 crash in Afghanistan. We also have had Special Operations Forces engaged in some firefights this week in Afghanistan. I know you are intimately connected to the fighting in Afghanistan because of your great work on your book. Have the American people sort of forgotten about this very real war that's still going on in Afghanistan?
Sadly, I think so. And it's not just the American people. I mean, I think to a large degree, it's American politicians who don't talk about it, don't talk about the fact that we are still losing men and women in Afghanistan. We still have thousands stationed over there. And the war has not been won, and we have not left. And I think you're right. I think both politicians from the Democratic and Republican Party don't want to talk about it, don't want to talk about America's longest war, don't want to address it just because it has been going on for so long and the public is so war-weary. And sadly, the public, I think, agrees. I think the politicians are taking their cues from the public.
Yeah.
Right. And it's sad, and we need to keep paying attention to the men and women over there.
Jake Tepper, CNN, thanks for joining us.